Today, we will look at a wedding that happened in 17th century Europe. This wedding was so grand and magnificent that it was said to have made even the Louis XIV, the Sun King himself, envious. Whose wedding was it? And what happened at the wedding? But first, please like and subscribe to continue receiving the interesting stories behind famous art. In our last video, we explored the childhood of Margarita Teresa, the most beloved princess of the Spanish Habsburg dynasty. We also saw her image from that era, preserved by the great court artist, Diego Velázquez. But what happened to the cute princess as she grew up? Did she grow up pretty? Or did she go the way of so many child celebrities? Who did she marry? And what was their married life like? These are the questions we will explore today, following her journey through adulthood. First, let's take a look at the European political landscape while Princess Margarita was growing up in Spain. Margarita was born in 1651, just after the end of the 30 Years' War. France and Spain continued their territorial disputes through the Franco-Spanish War, with Spain increasingly on the losing side. France was also slowly stabilizing its internal politics under the leadership of Cardinal Mazarin and Cardinal Richelieu, who followed. So, Spain was faced with a dilemma. Should it form alliances with other powers to counter the French threat? Or should it make peace with France and stop the war? Complicating matters further was the issue of succession. After the death of Crown Prince Balthasar Carlos in 1646, there were no surviving male heirs. Spain allowed the throne to pass to female heirs. Thus, both Maria Teresa and Margarita Teresa had potential claims to the throne. But if either of them were to be the queen, the offspring would belong to the house of her husband, and that would be the end of the Spanish Habsburg line. So, King Felipe IV was desperate to produce a male heir. And to the delight of everyone, Queen Mariana gave birth to Felipe Prospero in 1657. His birth temporarily eased the succession crisis, allowing Spain to focus on ending the war with France and opting for peace. And this peace led to the unexpected marriage of Maria Teresa to King Louis XIV of France. She was originally betrothed to Leopold, the Archduke of Austria. But even though Felipe Prospero was born, you never know whether he will survive to inherit the throne. And Maria Teresa marrying King Louis XIV means that, if anything were to happen to Felipe Prospero, their child, a French prince, would have a claim to Spanish throne. This result is something Spain could never allow. So, when Maria Teresa was getting married, France and Maria Teresa had to denounce her claim to the Spanish throne. Of course, France demanded a large dowry in exchange for giving up Maria Teresa's claim. Spain promised this dowry, but could not immediately pay the enormous sum. This failure would lead to future troubles. But nonetheless, Maria Teresa got married to King Louis XIV. This arrangement hinged on the hope that Philip Prospero would thrive, but tragically, he died a year after Maria Teresa's marriage. Although Carlos II was born soon after in 1661, he was a frail child, and not many people expected him to have a long life. To make matters worse, King Philippe's health was rapidly declining, increasing the likelihood of Princess Margarita ascending to the throne. This scenario made it almost inevitable that France would attempt to assert its influence through Maria Teresa. After all, Spain failed to pay Maria Teresa's dowry, so France could argue that her claim to Spanish throne was still intact. To counter this prospect, Spain wanted to forge a solid alliance with the Austrian Habsburgs. Thus it was decided that Princess Margarita would marry Emperor Leopold I. The Archduke her elder sister, Maria Teresa, was originally supposed to marry. Despite this decision, Felipe IV was deeply conflicted until his last breath. The prospect of France claiming Spanish throne was unbearable, but the union of Austria and Spain was also likely to cause oppositions from the neighbors, especially France. To prevent such turmoil, it was crucial that young Carlos to grow up healthy and produce heirs, but his frail health from the infancy casted heavy shadow on these hopes. Leaving these heavy concerns to his surviving family, Felipe IV passed away in 1665. His young son, the 4-year-old Carlos II, who was still in the care of his wet nurse, became the King of Spain, and Carlos's mother, Queen Mariana of Austria, ruled Spain as the Queen Regent. The Austrian Habsburgs actively persuaded the hesitant Spanish court, and especially the Queen Regent, who was originally from the Austrian branch of the family, to proceed with the marriage. So, in 1666, the 15-year-old Princess Margarita left for Vienna to become the Holy Roman Empress, leaving behind her 4-year-old brother. Now, let's take a look at her husband, Emperor Leopold I. He was the second son of Ferdinand III. Margarita's mother, Mariana of Austria, was the daughter of Ferdinand III. Leopold was the younger brother of Margarita's mother, Mariana, making him Margarita's maternal uncle. Gross, right? But Margarita probably didn't mind it much, since, after all, Margarita's parents were also uncle and niece, her mother Queen Mariana being the daughter of her father's sister. Margarita probably didn't mind their 11-year age gap either, having grown up with parents who had an age difference of nearly 30 years. Leopold was known to have quiet and serious demeanor from a young age. He was also small in stature, and introverted. He struggled with public speaking and gestures, but he was also warm and considerate once you get close to him. He had a strong artistic talent, particularly in music. Sometimes you see an introverted person, but once they get on stage, they light up like a completely different person, exuding charisma on stage. Leopold was like that. Leopold was initially not a contender for the throne, because he had an elder brother. Instead, he was expected to join the clergy, and studied at a Jesuit monastery. He studied theology, law, metaphysics, and astronomy. But this quiet bookworm of a prince suddenly became the heir when his elder brother died when Leopold was 14. All plans for him to join the clergy was now off, and Leopold left the monastery to receive imperial training. 3 years later, his father Ferdinand III also passed away, and Leopold prepared to ascend the throne of the Holy Roman Emperor. But his succession to the Holy Roman Empire was not smooth. Cardinal Mazarin of France disrupted this process, arguing that the Holy Roman Empire needed new leadership. Many electors along the Rhine were influenced by France. Mazarin even proposed French King Louis XIV as a candidate for the new Holy Roman Emperor. But this suggestion backfired, and the electors ended up uniting against France, ultimately supporting Leopold. However, to secure his position, Leopold had to make significant concessions to France, including a promise not to interfere in French-Spanish conflicts. This was a humiliating compromise that fueled his lifelong animosity towards Louis XIV. As he grew up, Leopold started prominently exhibiting facial features of the Habsburgs, including the elongated chin and severe underbite. To say that he was not a very attractive young man would be the understatement of the century. A portrait of an emperor was likely to have been touched up at least a little bit. If the photoshopped version was like this, then you can probably imagine what the real man looked like. But Leopold did not seem very concerned about his appearance. His relaxed, yet self-assured nature is also seen from his governing style. He was 18 at the time when he ascended to the throne of the Holy Roman Empire, and his rule was severely constrained by the influences of the nobles. This regency continued into his mid-30s. If the king wanted to start exercising more direct power, there might have been troubles. But, rather than trying to seize power, Leopold accepted this situation. He believed the time to be on his side, and eventually his time would come. In the meantime, he immersed himself in his passions, particularly music and the arts. He was a man of leisure with expensive taste, so to speak, enjoying a relatively carefree youth. But a king should marry and start producing heirs. So the Viennese Habsburgs persuaded the Spanish court for his marriage with Princess Margarita. Margarita was already a famous figure in the Viennese court. Remember, the Spanish court has been regularly sending her portraits to Vienna from the young age? Her portraits painted by Velázquez captivated everyone in Vienna. So, when it was announced that she was coming to Vienna as the new empress, many people were excited to finally see her in person. Leopold felt the same way. Since Maria Theresa married into France, Leopold knew he would eventually marry the other Spanish princess, Margarita. So this patient young man never really thought of marrying anyone else, and had been waiting for her to grow up. So, you can imagine how thrilled he was to finally welcome her to Vienna. Right after the marriage was confirmed, he started preparing to welcome her. He wanted to impress her with his specialty, which was putting on grand performances. He planned an enormous outdoor theater, which could accommodate as many as 5,000 people at once. He also planned the wedding events for nearly a year. People at the Viennese court, seeing this excited young emperor pouring his heart into the details of the wedding event preparations, found it quite entertaining. So finally, in the winter of 1666, Margarita arrived in Vienna, greeted by the eagerly awaiting Leopold, and by the city, excited to meet their new empress. Margarita was a friendly and easygoing people person. She quickly warmed up to her uncle, Emperor Leopold I, upon her arrival in Vienna. She affectionately called him uncle. In return, Leopold called her Gretel, a German nickname for Margarita. This endearing exchange became their standard form of address. The wedding celebrations between Margarita and Leopold was nothing short of legendary. The festivities began with a dazzling fireworks display, lighting up the Vienna sky, and continued with grand festivities and celebrations that lasted for an astounding 2 years. The performances during these celebrations were also wildly popular. Two of the most remarkable performances during these celebrations were the equestrian ballet and the opera Il Pomo d'Oro. The equestrian ballet was a performance where the dancers on horseback were performing ballet on horseback to music. This was a particularly impressive and also time-consuming performance to prepare, because the dancers had to train their move with the horses. What's more impressive was that King Leopold himself performed, showcasing his dedication and love for Margarita. He had secretly trained with his beloved horse, Speranza, for months to prepare for the performance. Another highlight was the opera Il Pomo d'Oro, or The Golden Apple, composed by Antonio Sesti. This opera, themed around the Greek mythology story of Judgment of Paris, featured elaborate scenes and live animals, including an elephant. To quickly recap, Judgment of Paris is the story where 3 goddesses, Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, tried to claim a golden apple labeled "to the fairest." Zeus, not wanting to judge this particular dispute, pushed the judgment to a human prince from Troy, Paris. Paris chose Aphrodite, she having bribed him with the most beautiful woman in the world. In the story of the opera, the 2 goddesses Hera and Athena caused trouble for Paris for choosing Aphrodite. Then during the climax, Zeus appears and sort out the problems in a Deus Ex Machina ending. During that scene, the actor playing Zeus turned around and offered the golden apple to Margarita, declaring her the most beautiful goddess. Leopold watched this with delight, having orchestrated these grand gestures to make his wife feel like the center of the universe. These extravagant celebrations, aimed to enchant Margarita, also had another ulterior, but no less important motive: to overshadow Louis XIV of France. Known for his love of grand performances, Louis XIV had made French court entertainments famous throughout Europe. He was famous for being a very good dancer, and often starred as the main character of the many ballets he staged. Leopold, who had always felt a fierce rivalry against Louis XIV, wanted to put on a show that will outdo the French king, and this was a wild success. News of the performance spread throughout the European courts. Perhaps this was the reason, the year after the performance, Louis XIV hurts his knee during a particularly difficult ballet performance. This injury eventually ended his dance career. So why was he trying such a difficult move? The timing is somewhat suspect. Could he have been trying to outdo Leopold's marriage celebration performances? Leopold and Margarita were a happy and devoted couple, enjoying a life filled with artistic pursuits and shared interests. The king planning various performances for his wife, and the lively young queen adding her ideas to the delight of her husband. Soon Margarita would be pregnant with many children as well. But, unfortunately for this happy couple, their offspring suffered from the consequences of their close genetic relationship, with only one daughter surviving. This was the greatest sorrow for this otherwise happy couple. Today, we looked at the marriage of Princess Margarita, the subject of Velázquez's masterpiece, Las Meninas. She had a happy marriage with a husband who loved her dearly, but also experienced profound sadness from the death of her children. Next time, we will explore the story of Margarita's untimely death, and also the story of her younger brother Carlos, the young king who was only 4 when Margarita left Madrid for Vienna. What happened to this unfortunate king who carried the fate of Spain on his shoulders? Who was his love? Please like and subscribe to find out what happens to Margarita and Carlos. It really helps a small channel like us.